think, Natalie, are you happy for us to?
Yeah, you can start.
Okay, wonderful. Well, welcome everybody. It's great to see so many people, individuals, and you see some rooms with a whole lot of people gathered. So it's really wonderful to see all this. Is welcome to our next round of ACM training, and this one I think really did pique the interest of a lot of people. Just this need for HR and just every organization, unless you're operating on your own. And so it's really great to be able to offer this as the ACM. My name's Graham Schnell. I'm the chairman of the ACM, just emceeing this first training. And yeah, we're looking forward to all that Fabian has to offer. And so we're going to have the training for an hour, and then so from 9 till 10, and then from 10 to 10:30 is going to be opportunity for questions and answers. So keep that in mind while the training's happening. If there's a question, jot that down. You're welcome to use the chat function of Zoom to pop those questions in there, so that we've already got a starting point when it comes to the question and answer time. And then we'll open it up for people to voice questions if we have the time for that as well. And then obviously just maintain the Zoom etiquette with muted mics, etc., while Fabian's doing his presentation. Excellent. So let me just introduce Fabian. He's going to be speaking on how to lead volunteers, particularly, but it's over 3 weeks we're going to be doing, really getting into the nitty-gritty of all things HR. But Fabian, in response to the call of the Lord into full-time missions, Fabian and his family, Lisa and their 2 daughters, stepped out in faith in June 2021 to volunteer with OM. Fabian serves as the National Director of OM South Africa, providing leadership to around 300 missionaries and their families located in over 40 countries around the world, and serving throughout South Africa in church mobilization, training, evangelism, discipleship, people care, social, education, and diaspora ministries, as well as various professional and office support functions. So very, very well-rounded in everything that he tackles. Before joining OM, Fabian worked as a human resource executive in different corporates for about 25 years. So that includes the South African Sugar Association, BSN Medical, Schneider Electrical, Paul Media, and Umgani Ironworks. In addition to wanting to see the gospel reach the least reached corners of the earth, Fabian has a passion for developing individuals and diverse teams to reach their full potential. So we've got someone very well equipped to speak into this aspect of both leading volunteers and HR in general. So welcome to you, Fabian. Thanks for being available, making yourself available to give this training. We're looking forward to all that you have to share. And with that, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Graham, for that introduction, and Natalie, thank you for the opportunity to share with the Association of Christian Media, and looking forward to this. I'm not going to repeat too much about myself. Graham has said, my wife and daughters, we live here in Pretoria now. We've moved up from Durban and enjoying the work of God with OM. And so this topic is really interesting to me because of my human resource background, but also seeing I think the distinction that stands out so strong between, can I call it normal employees versus volunteers? And over the years, I've also worked with volunteers in the church. And so I'm going to put up a presentation. Hey, a few things I want to say before I start is, one, expect a bit of generalization. Volunteers is a very general word. Volunteers are different in different organizations. So a lot of things we're going to say are not scientific, but really just general around majority of volunteers. I'm hoping today to speak around the leadership aspect more and understanding the heart of volunteers. And my mind says that if we as leaders understand volunteers, that would be a foundation in terms of how best to lead and work with volunteers. There's a statement that says that without volunteers, we would be a nation without a soul. And I think as we go through this discussion, and probably from your experience, you'd actually resonate with that, is the importance of volunteers within our society, within our organizations. And I know we're going to speak much more about Christian volunteers today. We'll speak from that angle, being the Association of Christian Media as well. I'd like to start off by trying to find out some things in our mind. What is common in our mindset around volunteers before we go on? I hope I'm going to be able to see the chat from here. If not, I'm sure Natalie will help me. But I'd actually like you to participate just for a minute or two before we move on. And I'll ask you a question, and if you can just type a word or two in the chat group, please, not long sentences, just a word or two, just so we can find our common thoughts around volunteers. First of all, what is your definition of a volunteer? And think of just a word or two words and just put that into the chat. Example, unpaid person, whatever you see, what you think of a volunteer as a description. Yes, someone offering time and skill, someone with a heart to serve, heart for a cause, willing heart, sacrifice. They give their time. Yeah. Serving sacrificially. Anyone else? Commitment. Often a person deciding to be part of your organization on a whim. Interesting. Okay, so if I take some common threads that's come through there, it's with the word service, sacrificing, giving of their time. I see the word heart that's come in. A person who shares your vision. Good, that's helpful. I'm gonna go on to the second question. When you think of volunteers, think of a positive, and it may be a bit of a repeat for some of you for the first one, but think of the positive perception that comes about a volunteer. So just a word or two that it's a positive message when you thought of a volunteer. Maybe around behavior or who the volunteer is. Generous, yes. Service, love. Kind, passion. Love and passion for what they're doing. A learner. Awesome. And I know some of you are sitting in groups. So if you're in your group, you want to answer to each other there and do it in your circle, you're welcome to also. Yeah, growth. Now I'd like you to think the opposite way around. And I know that you don't want to think negative things, but think of a negative perception you may have about volunteers. A word or two that comes across when you think about volunteers and it comes across as a negative side of volunteers. Abuse. They control the narrative, lack of commitment, unreliable. Not always available, distrust, unreliable. titled Okay. They overcommit often to their detriment. True, some go difficult to discipline, inconsistent, too casual, not accountable. You're doing more well than number 3. Okay. I'm gonna push you a bit more on this one in the last question. And I want you to think now, if you think overall of volunteers, you have positive perceptions, negative perceptions. Which one stands out the highest? Do you think that volunteers are more positive, or do you think they're more negative? You can just type in P or N, that we get an idea of the overall. Positive, positive. Positive. Okay, that's very helpful. So my purpose behind doing this exercise was for us just to think, first of all, individually, what do we think about volunteers? And then also, how is that in common with other organizations? And I'm sure you can see the overlap in it. Most here think positive. I see one saying sort of 50-50 there. And most of us have a similar definition. It's people that sacrifice, they're giving of their time, their hearts, they have the same cause, but there are challenges with it. There is commitment and reliability challenges. There is sometimes a feeling of ownership and entitlement, hard to discipline, hard to control. So not the way you would experience a normal employee. I'm going to move on from there. Thank you for that. As I was thinking about this, and I thought of what example in the Bible stands out to me when I think of leadership and volunteers. And one of the examples I looked at is Moses and the people of Israel. And I asked the question, why did over 1 million Israelites, we don't have an exact amount, the Bible speaks of 600,000 men plus women plus children. Why did all these people follow Moses out of Egypt, an established city, into the wilderness where there was nothing? We know that the people of Israel were in bondage, they were slaves, they were forced to work under the whip day after day. But we also know that Egypt represented a place of safety for them. Egypt was a place where they had a shelter over their heads, was a place where they would get food and water, was a place where their children could grow up, was a place with greenery and trees around them. The wilderness was a place where nothing existed, sand and dust. And across the wilderness was a Red Sea that blocked them. So after they've left Egypt, they're going into a wilderness and they're sitting between Egypt and the Red Sea. And you ask yourself the question, why did all these people volunteer to follow Moses into that wilderness? If I look at just a few things that connected them in this decision, in Exodus 3:7, God says, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. God's identifying with these people as he is, but they also identified with him. These were God's people. So the thing that united them, if you take this whole 1 million+ people, the one thing that made them different to everybody else in Egypt, the one thing that made them unique, was they were God's people. When they looked at each other, they might have had different faces, different names, different ages, but they had one thing that connected them. They had the same God. A second thing that connected this group of people, that made them such a united group in terms of being able to move, was the fact that they were united under one cause. This God of theirs had told each of them, they knew it deep within their hearts while they were suffering, that my God is coming to rescue me. And he's promised, I'm going to take you to a land flowing with milk and honey. So all these people had the same God. All these people were united under one cause. They all had the same dream in their heart. This is the driving factor deep within them, that this God is coming to rescue them. And then Moses comes onto the scene. And when God meets with Moses, and Moses says, how am I going to tell the people? How will they listen to me? Who are you? And God says to Moses, tell them, I am who I am has sent you. And this was Moses is linked to the same God of all these people. So the people believed that Moses was sent by their God. The people also not only had to believe that Moses was sent by their God, but the people also believed that Moses represented their cause. When Moses was sent, God said, tell them I have sent you to rescue them. Tell them that I've sent you to take them to the land flowing with milk and honey. So the people had one cause, one God. Moses as their leader came connected to their God, and Moses as their leader represented the same cause. I laughed a bit when I thought of the fact that if Moses came with a royal robe on and on a chariot and had all bodyguards around him, I wonder if they would have went across out of Egypt into the desert with him. But Moses represented the cause in such a clear way. When they saw Moses, they saw one of them. When they saw Moses, they saw somebody connected to their God. My assumption or my basis of what I'm going to share today really has to do with that on a whole. Is if we open the volunteer up like an onion, and we take the first layer of the onion off, underneath the volunteer, we're going to see them linked to an organization. This organization they came to volunteer in. But if we dig deeper and we take the next layer off, we're going to see that they came to the organization because they are linked to a cause. There's something that drives them within that brought them to this organization. And if you dig deeper, you will find their God, the cause linked to their God. Now, I said to you that a lot of what I'm going to speak is a generalization, because you may have a volunteer in your environment that you peel under the onion and you don't find what we're speaking about. But in general, majority of people that are going to come into an organization to volunteer, you're going to peel out and you're going to find the cause that they're volunteering for, and then you're going to find the God that is driving that cause within them. If I would show this in a different illustration, you have God deep within them, you have the cause that's linked to their God, you have the organization that's linked to their cause and their God. And the volunteer then responds because of that joint connection in the center. It's the meeting place. In business, they speak of the sweet spot, the spot that makes people partner or brings profit as the central place. And so the volunteer looks at that central place. Is this aligned to my God? Is this aligned to my cause? And is the organization aligned to these two? And that's the glue that holds the volunteer in place and in the organization. Please make notes to challenge some of this thought and to feel free to ask questions at the end of this. But one of the questions I'd like you to think of that you'll see on the screen there is this glue the same for all employees. Some of you may have only been operating in an environment with volunteers, but some of you may have worked in places with employees, and some of you may have a mix of paid employees and volunteers. When you think of an employee, is an employee attracted? Is this glue holding them together the same? I can't see if anybody put anything in the chat, but I'm sure your answer would be no. This is not what is drawing a normal employee into a workplace. This is very unique to a volunteer. And I think if we get a grip on this basis, this basic understanding, and it's not something new, it's something that every one of us knows, but if we can see this picture so much clearer, it will help us in leading volunteers. Especially as leaders. If this is who the volunteer is, and this is the glue that holds the volunteer together, then the heart of a leader needs to encompass this entire package. The heart of the leader needs to take into account God, the cause. Is the organization linked to God and the cause? And is the environment suitable for the volunteer to come and for the volunteer to stay? So there's many ways we could discuss the question of how to lead the volunteer. Today, I'm focusing on one specific direction or focus area, and that is focusing on the leader themselves. And I believe that if we as leaders understand our volunteers well and understand the volunteer environment well, that will help us to lead volunteers better. And yes, there are many other solutions that we may not get to discuss today, but this is from one angle. So in understanding the heart of the volunteer, one of the key distinguishers, or one of the things that we can really use strongly with the volunteer, is recognizing the volunteer and appreciating their sacrifice. I want to even say, have you ever thought of empathy as a reward? One of the things that you would think about and you know very well in leading volunteers is the biggest challenge we have in leading volunteers is we don't have the normal financial rewards. We don't have big packages and promotions and bonuses to pay. But one thing we do have that can really work well is empathy, understanding the volunteer and appreciating them. Something about volunteers, they do not join to get rich. Neither, in many cases, do they join even to earn a living. In our organization, OM, we have over 5,000 volunteers around the world. From South Africa, almost 300. And they don't earn a living through volunteering. And they will never get rich through volunteering. And I'm sure you have the same in your organization. So we know volunteers are not coming for financial gain. Volunteers do not join to grow their status in society. They're not joining to become very important people around in their community and in their organization and in their neighborhood. In actual fact, most people that volunteer actually are seen smaller in their society. Many walk out of roles in society and get looked down upon. Their families reject them because they became volunteers. There were disappointments because they became volunteers. Volunteers do not join to become famous. I hope you don't have any in your organization that are there to become famous, but in general, volunteers become less famous. They become people working in the background, people that are doing so much, but getting so little appreciation. I know certain religious organizations that do volunteer programs and splash it out in the media and put it all in the front line to be seen. But generally, and especially Christian volunteers, they will never be seen. And all the stuff that they do is only going to be the rewards they will only receive in heaven. Volunteers do not join for comfort or to avoid risk. Most of their steps forward, their decisions to be volunteers, has actually placed them at risk. Many are sacrificing the basics of medical aid and pension funds to volunteer. They're sacrificing by moving out of their cultures and living in another culture without the comforts that they normally have. Volunteers do not join for security. They place their life at risk. Yes, this is only one aspect of a volunteer, one angle to look at, but a very important angle. We need to start off with a recognition of where our volunteers come from in order to appreciate them. And that starts with empathy, getting right into their shoes and understanding the background and understanding their sacrifice and where they've come from. I'm sure you all know the term situational leadership. Situational leadership has to do with choosing different tools, and they often speak of golf, and I'm not a golfer, so I'm not even going to try to speak of the different types of clubs. But if you're going to be hitting this ball quite close, you're going to pull out a different club out of your bag. And if you're going to be hitting it very far, you're going to pull out a different club. So it speaks of every volunteer is different. And so my encouragement to us, first of all, is volunteers are first individuals. Sometimes over time, we can become a bit wary in certain environments. And this can happen when working with volunteers as well. We can grow a stigma around our volunteers where, just like we spoke earlier of different perceptions, we can only see them in a negative light. But I want to encourage us to go a step back again and sometimes just get refreshed around whose God has given us and see the volunteers as absolute individuals. See the one that is saying, I'm called by God and I've come to join. Appreciate me. There's somebody else that's a volunteer that says, I'm learning. And sometimes we get frustrated with the learner volunteer because they're not at the standard that we expect of maybe another employee. But many times that learner has actually sacrificed and not gone and done the qualification and studies that somebody else would have done. That learner may have sacrificed and not got work experience that somebody else would have done because they stepped in and they volunteered. And so that volunteer is saying, be patient with me, help me, develop me, understand where I come from. You can have another volunteer that can be very confident. I can't remember one of the words somebody said in the chat earlier, entitlement. You can have volunteers that are sometimes very controlling. They take ownership of the organization. And sometimes they just need to be guided. They need to be gently guided and reminded of why they're there. Another aspect I've seen in volunteers is you can have a very, and in general employees, a very quiet volunteer in the background that is doing a lot of work, but just not seen. And sometimes they're just saying, see me. So another aspect of working with volunteers is to see them as individuals, to avoid the groupthink that volunteers are all one way, because they are quite different. In understanding the heart of the volunteer, again, many of you have done this many times. For some, it could be new, but I want to just remind us again, it's important to match the passions of those volunteers optimally in the organization. Find out their shaping. What are the spiritual gifts that God has put in this volunteer? Why has God chosen this person to be in this organization? right now. And you notice my wording. My wording is not why has this person chosen to be here, or why did I allow them here, but why has God put them here? So God has a plan for every one of his people that are involved in the kingdom. What is the spiritual gift? Why is this person here? And then understand their heart. What is driving them? What's important to them? Look at their abilities, their different skills, the things they've learned, the things they can do, what comes natural to them. Look at their different personalities. And then look at the experiences they have. And these are so important so that we, first of all, know how to motivate them. When we know their heart, we know what's driving them, then we know how to motivate and how to encourage them. Then we also know what's the best role, best task to give them. Some of your best volunteers can be performing the worst because they're not in the right role, because they put into something that doesn't match who they are, and it's not natural. If we give somebody something that's natural for them to do, they will flourish without much effort. Match them also to the best leader for them and the best team. Just as important as them being in the right role is also having somebody that can motivate them, someone that they can feel connected to, somebody that aligns to them, a team that they can build together with and work in collaboration with. Place them at the best level. I use the word best here, but I don't mean best. I mean optimal. I mean the correct level for them. In each of these, there's no best role, there's no best leader, there's no best level. There is the right match for them. You don't want somebody operating at a level that is too difficult for them, and you don't want them in a level that's low and they're not thinking. So you want to keep challenging them with more and more. And then give them room for growth and development. I strongly believe that if we get people to work in their right passion by doing these things, and sometimes we need to go back and reevaluate and look at our volunteers and say, is this person in the right role? Are they in the right team? Are they connected to the right leader? Are they working at the right level? Have I been challenging them and giving them new things to work on? If they're in their right passion, commitment will follow and their work ethic will follow. In actual fact, if they really are in their right passionate sweet spot, the right place to work in, you're actually going to have the opposite effect of work ethic, where you're going to have to slow them down so they don't have burnout, because they're going to go home and they're going to be thinking about work, and they're going to be thinking on the weekends about work, and they're going to be calling you and they're going to want to be innovating. Passion will lead to work ethic. Sometimes we are focused so much on the work ethic, but we're misaligning somebody to their passion. I'm sure you've seen this statement many times. Volunteers don't get paid, not because they're worthless, but because they're priceless. And somebody that feels priceless, somebody that feels valuable, will give their all to you. And I'm sure many of you know this from bringing up children. I know this from my daughters. Is the more that we show value to them, the more we show them how important they are, the more we show them how special they are, the more we show them that we speak positive words into their life. Yes, you can do it. Yes, you got a C in your test this time. Next time you can aim for a B. And next time you can do better. The more we show them their value, the more we will get their support, and the more we will see them committed in what they're doing. Be careful that sometimes, even as leaders, I got to keep reminding myself of this, that we don't judge people based on positions, that we don't judge them based on salary levels, that we don't compare them the way we would to an employee in a workplace, because volunteers are very different. I want to speak on the next part of those circles in the heart, and that is the organizational match. And for us as leaders, how well is the organization matched to the cause? How clear is your vision and purpose in the organization? Can the volunteers see clearly why you exist? Can the volunteers see clearly where you are headed to as an organization? This is easier said than done. In our organization, we spent the whole year last year working on this. We went through a whole strategic process again, re-looking at our vision and purpose, re-looking at our mission, re-looking at who we are. And sometimes, if an organization has existed a long time, we may just be doing because we're doing, and we've always done it in a certain way. Sometimes it's good to stop and say, do we need to re-look at our vision again? Do we need to make sure it's clear? Is there clarity of the mission? The how that we fulfill this cause? Are people all aligned in the same direction towards the vision? So the mission says, this is the way we do it. This is the way we will reach our goals. This is the way we will reach the vision. Again, sometimes we've just been following on for a long time, and sometimes we need to go back and see, does everybody know what the mission is? Does everybody know how we're going to get to our goals? And then how relevant is our vision still? Is our vision still as relevant as when we started? Has the world around us changed? Is the macro environment, has it impacted everything and we haven't moved? And then how relevant is this to the kingdom? Sometimes organizations are so focused internally that we're not connecting anymore to the bigger kingdom and God's purpose. How are we impacting the kingdom? For a volunteer, this is critical. The volunteer wants to know, I'm sacrificing everything, the normal things of the world, so that I can be part of a cause that is relevant, that I can be part of a cause that is making a huge impact, not on a small section or only my organization, but on the kingdom of God. This justifies the sacrifice for the volunteer. For many volunteers, the values is going to be critical. And this is what we do. What controls what we do? What guides what we do? What's our guiding principles? What's our ethics and our morality? How do we make our decisions? When they look around, are they seeing fairness and equity in practices, in decisions being made? Is everything that's been done in truth? So values is huge for a volunteer. And that values even goes to how we treat different volunteers. Is there an equality in how we're treating the volunteers? Is there fairness? Is there an equal requirement in terms of meeting obligations and a standard that's in place? A statement that you'll see at the bottom of these next few slides, and I'll say it over and over again, is these things above well expressed in the organization? In other words, you can have a very good vision, good mission, you can be relevant, be impacting the kingdom, you can have good values, but if your volunteer cannot see it, if your volunteer doesn't know it, then it doesn't mean anything. So what will happen is they create their own perceptions of the organization. So as you think about the organization and its link to the cause, think of how well is this expressed in the organization. Do you need to do a new session again, get everybody together, have one or two group sessions, put up some information out that expresses, this is our vision, this is our mission, this is what's driving us as an organization, this is why we exist. And this is the impact we're making in the kingdom of God. So manage perceptions is just as important as the actual reality. you'd notice when I did that circles, I never put a leader in the circle, because a leader encompasses the picture of the organization. When people join an organization, they join for a cause, but then they get attached to a leader. And that's why it's so important to make sure, even in our departments, that people are attached to good leaders. That, well, we don't always have the choice of having the best leaders. Sometimes we're still growing the leaders as well. The leaders are volunteers. But a big emphasis is to have good leaders, to train our leaders, to grow our leaders, to have our leaders in the same vision and mindset. Are the leaders of the organization passionate about the cause? If someone's volunteering to come into the cause and they come under a leader that is less passionate about the cause, they're bound to have problems, either to be very demotivated or they won't stay. Are the leaders also sacrificing for the cause? I said to you just now, if Moses was being carried on a stretcher and had all security guards around him, I don't know if the volunteers would have left Egypt and followed him into that wilderness. They needed to see Moses representing them. And can be silly examples, but if our volunteers sacrifice so much and the leader comes to work in a Ferrari and flies in his helicopter in, the volunteer looks and says, what am I sacrificing for if my leader is not aligned to the same cause? So yes, it doesn't mean we must all be equal and the same level in everything, but also think of perceptions of how does your volunteer view yourself and our leaders in the organizations? Does the culture of the organization, how we treat people, how we respect people, what's seen as important, does the structures, hierarchical structures, how people are openness or closed door policies, leadership styles, autocratic style or relational styles, how are all these things matching the cause? I'll give you a simple example. In our strategic discussions last year, one of the things we said is, as OM, one of our core values is servanthood. Servant leaders, servants in all our volunteers and in everybody's sacrificing in lives. And so one of the things we said is when we look at our organizational titles, they don't match who we are. And so we took away all our titles and we started again from the beginning of this year. We've taken away CEO and CFO and all the titles you can think of. And we said together as an organization, what are things that make us sound more as servants? Not just for a picture of a name, but because we want that name to remind us of who we are. So we want everything around us in our organization to match who we are. And so we changed. And so we have associates and we have coordinators and so we've taken away everything that does not match, and this is might not apply to you in any way, but it's those kind of things we need to think about. Is our organization matching our cause? And then the very practical stuff on an individual leader level. Are our leaders humble? Are our leaders approachable? Are they authentic? Authentic means they're not wearing a mask every day, but they're real. They make mistakes. They are learning and growing. Are our leaders welcoming, but welcoming of innovation and creativity? When we think of the newer generations, Gen Zs, and these younger generations are super creative. They have different ways of thinking. They want to want to be heard. They want to put in place. They don't want to be stuck in a mold. So are we as leaders humble enough to make room for them to share their views? Are we humble enough to put them into think tanks? Are we approachable enough to start adjusting our systems so that we welcome in? And I don't know, what I've seen in some organizations is the volunteer gap and I don't know what it is in your organization, is getting further and further. So in other words, our volunteers are getting older and older, and we're having less young people coming into our organizations. And sometimes our organization and our style is not opening enough for them to come in or to keep them in. Again, you can have all this well in place. My last point that I'll keep emphasizing is perceptions are just as important. Does your volunteer know, and can they see that your leaders, the structures, the styles are matched into the cause? This is a communication element. You've seen this statement many times. People don't leave companies, they leave managers. Chris Richardson says, perhaps it should be people don't join companies, they follow leaders. And so we need to think, even as we need volunteers to continue coming in, as we need more and more people to be involved, that we focus on our leaders. That's ourselves and our leadership teams to be aligned with the cause, and then to be aligned with our God. When we think of the organization and we think of God, some of us struggle to, and I know it's a constant thing, are we an organization? Are we a church? Are we in between? And that struggle will always go on, that tension. But no matter where we sit between organization, central, more spiritual setup like a church, we still need the foundation of God. And that is critical to the volunteer coming. Deeper than the cause is their connection to their God. And so the volunteers looking into the organization to see, is this a kingdom organization? Is the organization that I'm part of directed by the eternal King? Or is this a man-made organization? Yes, there'll be men leading, but they're looking deeper to see what's the foundation of the organization and what is the kingdom link in the organization. Is this kingdom organization operating under earthly governance? And that's what it should be. We have a kingdom organization, but then operates under earthly governance. And this is the picture that they should see. We don't want our volunteers to only see earthly governance. We want our volunteers to be very clear that there's a higher umbrella over our organization, that this is a kingdom organization. From an organization perspective as well, that we are operating at the highest standards. Now, forgive me for my bias on this, but I believe in missions, and I tell our organization every time I speak that we are doing the most important job in the whole world, that we are doing a job above the presidents of the world and the governments of the world. Because the job that we have in OM is to take the gospel to people that have never heard the gospel. This is an heavenly task. This is the task given by God himself for Jesus to be known to the world. I believe it with all my heart, and I drive this message in every day. And I believe that because we are serving the Most High God, because the task that we're doing is so important that it's higher than earthly tasks, then we do need the higher standards of operation. We do need to be growing in our skills constantly. We do need to start bringing in different types of learning. We need to help our volunteers to understand that they need to keep growing more and more. They need to have a mindset of continuous growth and continuous improvement. There needs to come in accountability. I spent probably about 6 months early last year or the year before speaking on the parable of the talents. And as an organization, we delved deeply into that parable. There are beautiful tools and elements that you can get and learnings out of that parable about how God has gifted different people individually for a calling and a task, how God has an expectation of outcomes, how God partners with individuals with their talents to fulfill those outcomes, how God himself is coming back to check accountability with what have we done with the talents and the tasks that he's given us, and how God will judge us according to those things. So the standards of operation do not come from the world. They do not come from corporate environments. They do not come from governance meetings. Standard of operation come from the word of God. The highest standards are there already. And so an organization that has kingdom mindset, that has a foundation on the Lord, will use those standards from the Bible. They are there. So take hold of them and use them and in order to direct the organization forward. Is the organization a praying organization? And is what we're doing biblically guided? Yes, we need to follow, and I'm very strong on that, coming from a human resource background. We need to follow the legislation of our country, our land. We need to have the governance standards in place. We need to do things in order and be compliant, as long as they don't go against the word of God. But we also need to be biblically guided. And we need to find that balance. And people, again, you'll see the same line at the bottom. They need to know that it's a praying environment. If I say to our organization over and over every week, we're a praying environment, but they never see me praying, that we don't have consistent prayer meetings, that they're not seeing that when there's needs and we have financial needs or whatever it is, that we come together as an organization and we trust God and then we celebrate in the miracles that God does. Those perceptions are just as important. They need to see these things visibly in front of them. Visionary leadership also takes into account that volunteers thrive in community. I think of Acts chapter 2, the last few verses where it speaks of how the community of God got together. They prayed together, they sat under the word of God together, they broke bread together. Those elements of community are critical to volunteers. Most volunteers don't want to go sit in a corner and work by themselves. And if you have a smaller organization where you have few people or they're working alone in departments, even link them to volunteers in another organization. Let them have a peer group. But volunteers thrive on community. They thrive on growing together, on thinking together. Put them in groups and think tanks. So in summary of that section, volunteers would be looking at us as leaders and say, let us see that you love our God. And let us see that you love the same cause that we love. And if those two are answered, then the volunteer is going to say, then show us the way to go there together. So in summary, if we as leaders at the core of our heart can get to understand the volunteer better, the volunteer as an individual, to understand that the volunteer is there because the organization is linked to the cause that they link to in their heart and linked to God's plan. And then if we can align where we need to align, but also communicate very strongly this central glue. The volunteer needs to see this picture, not the picture on the screen, but the picture that we are connected to that central place. And that would give the volunteer the passion they need to be committed and to have a strong work ethic, and also keep the volunteer involved in your organization. Okay, just before 10 o'clock, Tried to time it quite well, Graham.
You've done very well. Yeah, that was excellent. Thank you, Fabian. I think that gives such a good, this lays a foundation. And I was just thinking, as much as it obviously applies specifically to leading volunteers, that was your message. But I think so much of what you shared is just general good leadership of an organization. Even thought when you asked that question about, does a normal employee fit the same description of why they would be a part of an organization, and your answer was no, which is true, because yes, they are coming. There is certainly, and whether they would stay without getting that salary at the end of the month might be different. But I think a good employee that works hard, that is committed, that stays long, is not because of the paycheck. It is because of those aspects that you shared as well. So yeah, those of us, or those organizations where we're working maybe primarily even with employees, I think all that you shared still is very, very relevant and good. So yeah, so we're opening it up for questions. Everybody has, if you've got questions, I think there's so much that's been shared by Fabian so far. Just compliments, no questions. Excellent, thanks. Brilliant, informative, well done, thank you. But if anybody does have a question, you're welcome to use the chat box. But I think we're small enough as well. If you want to just raise a hand or put your video on, put your mic on, and just go ahead and ask any questions that you might have. Great presentation. It's a good sign when you've answered all the questions in the presentation. Okay, there we go. We've got a question. Go ahead.
It's more of a comment. Thanks so much, Fabian. That was so great. I think the way those circles was a brilliant way of showing the kind of ripple effect of what we do as kingdom workers. And I think the faith and the trust that we have to have in God as well, by sending us and by dealing with people as well. Like, I think to remember to not be too much of a control freak with volunteers either, but to truly trust in God that if a person, I've got loads of volunteers, but not all of them are as involved. So they're in levels. I color code them. And so one guy only comes once a year. But just because he's not that involved, I'm not going to say, look, you have to be involved, otherwise you can't kind of be part of us. To really just trust God as well, that he will bring who he will bring, and he will take who he will take again when the season is over for that person as well. So the praying and what you were saying at the end about that complete dependence on God from a core point of view of who we are as the leaders and as the organization is absolutely, I think you can't run it without that complete dependence on God in all of it.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, thank you.
Couldn't say it better than that, Sonia. We got to keep reminding ourselves that it's God's work. And if it's God's work, he will look after it. If it's God's work, he will resource it. And as long as it's his work.
Yeah. That's right. And it's such a beautiful testimony when you do that he does do that. And it's such a wonderful way for everybody's faith to deepen. Our volunteer movement is quite new where we are in our organization, and God is just blessing it. And people are just truly, even employees in the organization are seeing the result of what is happening with the amount that we can get done with the help of volunteers. Initially people didn't really know what to do with it, but the more the time goes by and they're seeing how God is working, because it's God working. These people are not being paid. They give their time, their petrol, their resources, everything from their own pockets. And it's really deepening people's faith in the organization and their dependence on God as well, which is an amazing thing to see.
Yeah, it's good. I thought I'd ask the question. Sorry, I see. Thank you for these workshops. Leaving. Okay, somebody has to leave. That was Filma, I think. I thought I'd ask the question to you, Fabian, but maybe open it up to everybody about just creative ideas for showing appreciation to volunteers. I was at a conference recently that was talking about events particularly, and they were saying that often you've got volunteers helping with these events, and they said it's all about what you feed the volunteers, and they come for the chocolate brownies, and if we give them really nice chocolate brownies, they're happy. And then a little soon after that, I heard of somebody else that was doing a big conference, and they said, no, they get all the volunteers, they've got jars full of bar one chocolates, and it's help yourself to the chocolate. And I spoke to one of the volunteers, and they were like, yeah, that's one of the reasons why I do this. So I found it quite interesting. And it wasn't, I mean, obviously they had a heart to be there, but there was something about showing appreciation in different and creative ways. So there's a few, Fabian, you can think about it, but Mama, do you want to go if you've got an answer to that?
Not an answer, but a comment.
Okay, sure.
Yes, especially when, firstly, thank you, Brother Fabian. It was such an amazing presentation. What also really touched me is the issue of leading by an example, where you were saying that as a leader, am I humble? Am I approachable? So that I don't expect the volunteers to do what I'm not doing. So I think it's something that helps us as leaders to keep checking ourselves. Are we still on track? Yes, so thank you so much for that.
Thanks, Mama. Sonia, you also got a hand up.
No, just as a suggestion for appreciation, I think what Fabian was saying, empathy as a reward is such a true thing, and to do is to always express that to them. Like, we can't do this work without you. We are so grateful for you, and we thank God for you, and just to reiterate that all the time, but also to involve them in organizational events, like where they're not maybe necessarily naturally involved, where you bring them to your year-end function, or when you're having breakfast for donors, or we always invite our guys that are really working hard. We include them so that the rest of the staff can also meet them and they can feel part, because our volunteers are all over the country. So it's very seldom that we are together in one place. So to include them in certain important events, to make them feel valued in that sense, that they are part of a bigger, of the family of the organization, that there shouldn't be a separation between us and them, kind of. It's one great kind of family,
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, thank you. That's great. Thanks, Sonia. Zolani?
How's it? Thanks, Fabian, for the message. It's really wonderful. I've got two questions to ask. I think you've touched something that really strikes me. I'm working with a lot of old volunteers, and I just wanted to ask, what is the right way to motivate young, which is called young people, to volunteer? Because it's all about the status and it's about the money. And it's about showing up in terms of, if I do this, I feel good. And then the second one, how do we get the kids? I think I'm looking at my kids at the young age. How do you really get them to plug in terms of volunteering, and how to install that into them? So those are my two questions that I just wanted to raise it up.
Yeah, thanks, Zolani. Do you want to go for it, Fabian?
Yeah, if I go back to the rewards one first, it's not very easy. And everybody listening on this call knows that, because you want to be consistent with rewards, and you want it to be seen fairly. So I agree very much with what Graham said, is go with something that is simple, and affordable, that you can be consistent to everybody. I have found that when you try to give appreciation to one volunteer, it's very hard to distinguish what does that person's sacrifice mean for somebody else that you haven't given the clear recognition to in the group. I'll give you an example of one that we recently did. We had a couple come back from Ukraine, and they had made the decision to stay in Ukraine at the start of the war. And they've been through the hardest times you can imagine, but they've also seen the greatest blessings. And we decided to give them a plaque of appreciation. Now, we had to distinguish that appreciation very differently from all our other volunteers that are serving in all other places around the world in difficult circumstances, and be very clear on why we're giving this plaque. That you actually had the opportunity to come out from the war situation before time. The organization was actually advising you to come out, but you listened to God and you stayed there. So you know, that distinguishing and that consistency is so important. And I also like what Sonia said around finding those occasional times to just bring people together or involve them in things. One of our groups, our people care group, we got people care, member care workers around the country. We brought them together in a session. And one of the comments that came was, Fabian, it's probably been 3-4 years since we actually came together. It's so much recognition for us just to feel that you've called us together as the people care team. And we're not seeing each other online, but we're seeing each other face to face. So finding those ways, it takes a lot of creativity. But I just want to say also, just be very consistent that your reward doesn't actually discourage other people.
Yeah.
Sorry, Graham.
No, I was just gonna remind you about the second question around getting the kids on board, or young people.
Yeah, I do think that, especially for long-standing organizations, I take our organization example is OM has been around for 30 some odd years, 40 years in South Africa. And sometimes our systems haven't adjusted to the time. And we need to look at our systems. We need to look at how we are marketing. What are we communicating? Is our messaging matching the time? When I say matching the time, I don't mean compromising our core standards, and don't mean compromising who we are. Maintain who we are, but we need to adjust with the communication style. Who are we involving? The target audience. We want young people to feel that they are welcome in. And then also when they come in, not to just be put in places just to be seen as a token on the wall. In the last year, we set up a leadership incubator and welcomed young people that are in the organization, and then we grew them throughout the year. And at the beginning of this year, we've appointed a few of them into our senior leadership team. And you must know it's their first time leading, so they need a lot of hand-holding and carrying through. But doing that is now showing others in the organization and shows young people from outside of the organization that, hey, OM is serious about young people. They're giving them a voice. So we've got a mixed team of more experienced leaders, and we've got young leaders. And you can imagine the challenges that comes with, keeps me very busy. But there's the reality of young people saying, okay, we do have a seat around the table, and our voice is listened to.
Thank you. No, awesome. Thank you. We have, it says Sean, I don't know if it's the Good News Community Gang. You guys had a question?
Yes, it is. Firstly, we just want to say, Graham, thank you to ACM for putting this workshop together. And thank you, Fabian, for these insights. You know, it has been a worry for us because in South Africa, we are unlike the developed countries where volunteers can volunteer their time and resources. So in South Africa, mostly our volunteers volunteer their time. And in most cases, they have no resources. So that's why financial resources becomes a strain. But what you have brought in today has helped us to up our game. But I just wanted to share with you what we do at GNCR. Firstly, we celebrate birthdays of every volunteer, and we make a cake with the name of the volunteer, and they will eat half with the staff and half they take to their family, you know, so that the family can see that we appreciate the member that is volunteering. Secondly, we do year-end functions where we give love tokens, a financial contribution just for Christmas. A person can be able to have, you know, a decent Christmas with the family. And we have ongoing training. Most of our former volunteers are in key organizations today. We have them at Focus, we have one at Focus, we have them at TWR, Christianity Works, because of our training. So we've accepted that we are an incubator. We train them and then we produce them to other organizations who can be able to use them. And we take pride of that. We can see that we have invested in their lives whilst they've invested in the organization as well. And also we do daily devotions just to motivate, because we know that especially lately the challenges that are facing our volunteers are many, you know, with the food price increase, the pandemics that we have come out of. So we do those devotions so that we can motivate each other and don't lose focus of the fact that there is a cause that made us to come here to invest our time and be service to God as well. And also thank you for reminding us the spirit of servanthood is very important. We really appreciate this workshop, and we know that it will go an extra mile to revive our organization. We've just received our new license for the next 7 years, so it's a good start for us. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Awesome stuff there. Well done.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's really good, encouraging, and good suggestions for some of us as well. Any other questions? I don't know if I've missed anybody. Okay. Well, if there aren't any more questions, we'll wrap up the training then. Thanks again so much, Fabian. Really appreciate your wisdom, your knowledge, your experience. Really incredible experience coming from the HR background in a corporate world, and then applying that and leading a big missionary Christian organization. So you've got the perfect mix to be able to share with us. And so thank you for being willing and available to do that. We really appreciate all the insights that you've given today and then for the next couple of weeks. So just a reminder, we're going to be same time, same place next week and the week after. And Fabian's going to be tackling further aspects of HR in Christian ministry. So make sure you've put those in your calendar and not miss that. But thanks again so much. Natalie, is there anything else? We are going to make the recording available as you mentioned earlier, so that will become available probably after the completion of the training. So you can look out for that. Any other comments from your side, Natalie, before we wrap up?
No, that's all. Thank you, Graham. And we will see, I think, almost all of you back here next week. So that's great. Looking forward to it. And thank you for joining us.
Yeah,
Thanks so much. Sonia, was that a last? Did you want to have
the final word? Is Fabian going to close for us in prayer?
That's a great suggestion. Would you mind doing that, Fabian?
To do so. Yeah. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, God, for this time of sharing we could have together as we learn and grow from you. And Lord, as we think of the people that you've given us to work alongside, Lord, our hearts are there for your kingdom. We all stand as leaders, learning and growing and wanting to see your kingdom come and your will be done. And I pray that you'd give us wisdom and insight into how to understand the workers that you give us, especially volunteers, how to care for them, how to motivate them, how to guide them, and Lord, how to navigate even in a world that is so different and so changing every day. Bless each organization involved, every leader on this call. And Lord, as we continue to discuss and share about this in this next 2 weeks, that you would give us more insight and speak into our hearts. Bless, Lord, the Association of Christian Media and their leaders, and Graham and Natalie, and go with each one of us now. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thanks again,
Looking forward to the next 2 weeks.
Amen.
Bye.